Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk today about elections in the UK and a little bit about what happened in France. I hope I can give you a sort of a different take on what happened in France, a little bit about. Uh, I'll get to that, but I've received all my leaflets now for Oxford West and Abingdon, which is my area. And so I have received the Labour one, and I have received the Reform one. This is the Reform one. I have received the Green Party one. I have received the Liberal one. They keep sending them because our representative, our MP, is from the Liberal Party, Lila Moran. And but not today, but she keeps sending them anyway. And I have not received any from the Conservative Party. And then I have kind of discarded basically Conservative, Labour, Greens. They don't do anything for me, so I have discarded them. Also Reform for the reasons that I explained to you. I don't want to go into that again. I know that many of you disagree about Reform, at least as a change and everything else, and I understand your position. I myself, I have decided that although they have an issue where they break from the other parties, perhaps more emphatically that of immigration, nevertheless, it's going to be, I fear, a little bit of the same thing. So it's going to be, the way I see it, okay, it's going to be a little bit of a band-aid, but it's something. Yeah, I understand that. But I have come to a position where I think that the system needs to be shaken a little bit more than that, a little bit more than a band-aid, so that politicians can realize that there is a lot of discontent. I don't think they're taking that discontent all that seriously. So anyway, no. So I'm left with. I told you that I would probably, because of all those reasons, I would probably vote for an independent candidate or a Workers' Party candidate or whoever else was there. Okay, so sure enough, I get the independent candidates. Okay, and I start reading. Politicians are one of the least trusted professions in the UK by a substantial margin. Okay, so misguided priorities, dishonesty, imbalance of power. So he makes his case. I thought I will read the leaflets actually, and if I like what they say, I'll probably go into, further into their websites and so on. But I'm just reading the pamphlets, and then I get this. At the end of it all, it says voters. Quote, negotiators advise the UK to threaten to leave the EU. Oh, I'm not reading this properly. Okay. Voters. Negotiators advise the UK to threaten to leave the EU with no deal despite the stakes. Despite the stakes. So negotiators advise the UK not to leave the EU despite the stakes. In other words, voters feel a duty to vote despite a lack of quality on offer. Not voting is better than accepting mediocrity. Okay, what this tells me is that in this little sentence at the end, despite the stakes of leaving the EU, that he is in favor of the EU, in other words, against Brexit. Okay, I understand that Brexit didn't do much because although it was officially, uh, we officially came out, nevertheless it was sort of thwarted and nothing happened. But it seems to me that to be for the EU at the moment, when there is so much going on, when we see that the EU is actually the economic political arm of the US, NATO is its military and political arm, but the EU is obviously following the United States, despite its policies being so detrimental to the EU. My own position here is right now to be in favor of the EU. No, so I'm discarding him. Then I was left with two. One was the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. I had heard of this party. I know. Oh, here is the woman. And then I had heard of this party. I'm going to look more into it. I believe that it is socially more conservative, but economically more to the left. So I thought, okay, I'll read that pamphlet. And the other one was this one, the CPA. The CPA, which means, I don't know what it means. Oh, the CPA is the Christian People's Alliance. Okay, so I thought, okay, so let me read these two then. So the CPA would transform Britain. Okay, the candidate has attended Magdalen College in Oxford, looks very professional, support marriage and family. Okay, that's good. NHS, restore GP fund holding, respect for life, fight poverty and homelessness, make tax fair and care for the poor. Okay, all right, so this sounded pretty good. On the back, I won't read you the whole pamphlet, but cut quangos. But there is something about it. Okay, so when I read through the whole thing, something didn't quite add up, in the sense that it sounded very socially conservative, you know, family and so on and so forth. Okay, and cut crime, yeah, and save our city centers, good, and then fight poverty and homelessness. But the way it is written, I said, there is something here that doesn't. It sounds as if they are giving me a little bit of everything, because the way they write it, they seem to go into accepting two directions that are not easily reconcilable. So I thought, hold on, let me read it carefully again. I'll have to look into their website, certainly. And then I looked at the very top here, and there I see the flag of Israel. CPA stands by Israel and its right to defend its citizens. Okay, so that tells me everything I need to know, because the right to defend themselves is for both. I mean, the Palestinians also have a right to defend themselves. But the fact that they put the flag and everything else, it tells me that this is perhaps the equivalent of the guy here is Ian is a commissioner on the Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians. Okay, good. he studied theology at Wycliffe Hall in Oxford. Okay, that's very Protestant. I'm Catholic. That's not that shouldn't be a problem. But reading more, it tells me that this is probably more of an evangelist thing, and perhaps it has, together with the Israeli thing, it tells me that perhaps he's close to the evangelist in Congress in the United States. So I think I'm going to leave it. So, so I'm left with the Social Democrats. Okay, and what do they say? Protect women's sex-based rights in sports, hospital wards, and so on. Support the family. The family is the foundation of society, a truth that many have forgotten. Education, okay, good. Back British industry, okay. And then they go on to other things, national. So I think I'm left with this one. That's really the only one I could possibly vote for at the moment. The others, no. So this is what I'm left with, basically. I'm going to look more into their website. Hopefully I won't find anything that I will say, oh, no. But it seems to me that this is the closest, perhaps, that I can get. Okay, to my, all right, so that is my British UK on the 4th of July. Now, what happened in France? Okay, so it seems that the party of Marine Le Pen is getting about 34%. Then the combination of the left, 28%, and Ensemble, the Macron party, 20%. There is also a party, the Republicans, with about 10%. These are the right, the Gaullist, the Gaulle party, you know, ideology and so on. Okay. Now I was looking at a newspaper called Libération. Libération is an interesting paper because it had been founded actually by Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. And in the 1960s, it used to be a really radical left-wing party. I mean, there with, you know, Mao during the Cultural Revolution, Che Guevara, all that. Okay. Then it became a little bit more subtle, more a little bit to the center, but it was always more left-wing than your ordinary left-wing, what used to be left-wing, you know, like the Guardian or the I don't know, La Repubblica in Italy or El País in Spain, that kind of thing. But then it was bought off, like all of them, okay, by the banks and the, you know. So what we had, well, in France you had Le Monde, kind of more or less in the middle, Le Figaro on the right, and Libération on the left. They're all the same now, as you know. Okay, so in this France of the Fifth Republic, just in case, okay, that you're not familiar with it, okay, the president, it's universal suffrage. You vote directly for the president. It used to be every 7 years, but then I believe it was Sarkozy, or perhaps a little bit before, that changed that to every 5 years. Okay, so you vote directly for the president. Okay, and then as it happens in the United States Congress, the assembly, the parliament, is elected every 4 years. So it is possible, since the elections happen at different times, it is very possible for the president to be of one party and the parliament to be of another party. and as it happens in the United States. Okay, but in the case of Macron, he was first elected in 2017, and the whole thing, he had no party, he had no program, everything was arranged, and so he was re-elected in 2022, and he has had the good fortune of always having the assembly of the same party as he. Okay, so he didn't have to fight those battles. So now it's going to be perhaps the first time that this had only happened uh, having different parties. In other words, the president party and the assembly's party being of a different parties. I think it only happened. It doesn't happen very often. And I tell you, it didn't happen. It happened with de Gaulle in the 50s, and it also happened with, I believe it was Mitterrand in the 80s, once, or Chirac in the 90s, something like that. Anyway, what happens is that once the president is elected, if the party in power is a different one, the president has the power to dissolve parliament and call elections to parliament. Okay, hoping that since the people elected him and his party, that they will elect the assembly. And so they have the power to dissolve parliament, okay, and then people vote for their MPs. And so what happened here is that a few weeks ago, a month ago, in the European parliamentary elections, the majority, the Marine Le Pen party won the elections. And for some reason, the people ask why, he decided to dissolve parliament and to have elections for parliament. Okay, so what is going to happen now? Okay, for the, you know that in the European elections for the European Parliament, it's something quite amazing in that they have parliament in two cities. One is in Brussels, that is where the government, the commission is, but parliament has to be in Brussels, and then they move to Strasbourg in northern France, and they go back and forth, back and forth. They have two different places. Imagine the expense, okay? So from Brussels to Strasbourg on a high-speed train, it will be about 2 hours. But they move together with all their files and their personnel and their staff and everybody else, and they keep going from one to the other. Okay. So I don't know whether you had any chance at all, or whether perhaps the BBC or someone else reported on the debates that they have. Okay, there was a very kind of interesting debate between the two leaders, not Macron and Le Pen, but between two very young, I think they are kind of only in their late 20s. The prime minister at the moment, the one that is there with the same party as Macron, his name is Gabriel, what is his name? Attal. Yeah, I have it written here. He is very young. He was very active in the gay community. He openly declared himself that he's married to another man. Very active, pro that community and so on. He didn't hide it. Okay, and the other one, his name is Jordan. Let me get the Jordan Babela, and the other one is Gabriel Attal. Okay, they're in the late 20s, very, very young. Okay, what happens when the president, the French have a special word for this, when the president is of one party and the parliament is of another party, they call it cohabitation, cohabitation. trust, trust the French to find a word like that, okay, which is a very uncomfortable cohabitation. That is why they call elections whenever that happens. Okay, now the fact that they're very young, um, extremely young, if you look at them. The one for the party of Marie Le Pen, who just won, so he will become prime minister. I think he's a lawyer, but comes from a very, very humble family, actually. So he has this working class background there. I think his mother used to clean houses and things. So a very strong sort of working class influence there. The other one is much more sort of upper middle class, and the Gabriel Attal. Now, what I find is that in the case of all politicians, when we could say that there was a right wing and left wing, okay? When we were arguing about just national politics, we could say right and left, and we knew what we meant. What has changed? Now they're all kind of the same, it seems, because what has changed is that it's no longer left or right, it's more, it's not horizontal, it's more vertical, is globalist and sovereignists. That's really the breaking point there. Okay, globalist, or well, globalization, one world government, I think that's gone. But certainly the world led by the hegemon, the United States, they're called Atlanticists. They are called the Anglosphere in other countries. I've heard actually in other countries call it the Anglo, what was it? The Anglo-Zionists, which seems peculiar from here from England, but that is the way they see it. The Anglo-American position in the world, okay? And the others, the ones that are called nationalist, has become, a sort of almost a dirty word in some quarters. It used to mean patriotism, but it's now being assigned some other meaning. So I think it's better to just say sovereignists, okay? And that is the difference now. So before, in earlier times, we could see that a person from the right and from the left were very, very two different ideologies, yeah? But now you could have pro-Anglo-American hegemon kind of thing, both from the right and from the left. That is no longer the division. And sovereignty also from the right and from the left. But that is the real distinction, it's a vertical one. I don't have anything against young people at all. I think it's absolutely excellent that young people get involved. We older people had the past and the present, but the future is theirs and they have to become involved. No problem at all. The only thing is that to become president or prime minister of a nation, I think you need to have lived the experience of knowing your country very well and all the differences, the different regions, different kinds of people that inhabit your country. It's not just enough to be told or to learn it. You have to, I think you have to live the difference. In this case, in France, you have to know the difference between, you know, the fishermen in the south, or um, the farmers in the center of the country, or the bourgeoisie of Normandy, or the fishermen in Brittany, actually. The miners and the factories in the north, and so on. There are different regions with people with different concerns, and certainly I don't think Macron ever tried to comprehend the country in that way. He's very much a sort of I see him more of an elitist kind of person. But in any case, how did he get? I'll get back to that point. How did he get there? Okay, he had no experience at all in politics. He had been the Minister of Defense of Finance for a very short period of time, less than 2 years, I think. Had never occupied any office or any political office or anything like that. But he was chosen by a man with great power and influence in France. His name is Jacques Attali. Jacques Attali had been in politics forever, for the last 40 years. He was actually special advisor to Mitterrand, I believe. Okay, and he's in contact with not only politicians, but the banking business, the Rothschilds, and so on. He's also Jewish. And oh, I forgot to tell you, yes, that there are 2 rounds in the elections. I'll come back to that same point. There are 2 rounds, but if you, as a candidate, you get more than 50% on the first round, you don't need to go to the second round. Okay, so the first round is actually the most important. Anyway, so where was I? Let me. Yes, so Jacques Attali is a very powerful man, and he's one of the 10 most powerful families in France in terms of finance and entrepreneurs and so on. And he actually invented Macron, because he introduced, after a work study session or something like that, he introduced Macron as a young man to the Rothschilds. In France, the banking, the Rothschild is called the Rothschild House. Okay, and he was introduced to the main people really by this Attali. And very soon he became afterwards the Minister of Finance, and very soon he became a millionaire, multimillionaire. That is, when he was working with the Rothschild, became a multimillionaire. With a great apartment in France, and anyway, perhaps in American terms, it wouldn't sound so huge, but an apartment in Paris where he was, and so on, you know, that would cost you €1 million for sure. So by the time he became the Minister of Finance, he was already a millionaire. He was the richest member of the cabinet. When he was elected president, they interviewed the director general of the Rothschild bank system, and they asked him, um, how important is it that he was a banker to begin with, that he had worked in the banking system? And his reply was, this is the Director General, it is important, actually, that background in banking. He says, it's important because our work, it's about inventing stories, not telling stories. He used the word inventing stories when we do business. And also because you learn the art of manipulating public opinion. That is what he said, this banker. There are two things here, inventing stories and manipulating public opinion. So anyway, this Jacques Attali actually invented Macron. He has always been behind the power, behind the throne. So this was a Project Macron. And so they selected him, and first of all they select him, and then how do you become popular with the people? Well, then you have the media, which the same people that selected him own the media. So there you go. So it's not, 24/7, advancing his cause. The journalist is not, the journalist, it's not that they're told exactly what to say, I suppose, but they certainly know in which direction they have to go. And they do. So it was very obvious that he was being sold like a product, I think that's what they do now. It's like they make one candidate, they discard the other, and then the media continues with this 24/7. And so most people hear the message repeatedly by all the channels, and so you hear it from these journalists that you follow and admire, and you also hear it from this sexy young lady here, and then from the other one, and then from the other one, and you don't have time, so you say, well, there must be, something about that. So you believe. They also, in many cases, especially in economics, they use this difficult language that no one can understand and so on. But very soon it is clear that a lot of people absorb it, and the danger is that they think it's their own ideas, that they have reached that conclusion themselves, not quite realizing that perhaps, when you hear something again and again and again, well, you just, unless you're actively forcing yourself to go against it and you don't have any other evidence to the contrary, you're going to accept it. Because the people were told, even at some point they said that he was absolutely brilliant. And the people, he was young, he was good looking, and he was brilliant. So, why not? Brilliant, it took him twice to get admitted to read political science at the university, and even afterwards his studies, he didn't do all that well. But he was, in some case, selected, chosen by the ones that have that power to groom him, as it were. So there you go. What else do I have here? Yes, so he's very good at following, obviously, the Atlanticist, let's call it that, the Atlanticist model. And that is, the emphasis is on financial activity in the country, speculative, okay, rather than productive activity. So if the jobs leave to go somewhere else, it doesn't matter to you. Okay, so all the jobs disappear, they go to China, Vietnam. That is not their concern. And so eventually the economic structure, just disintegrates, just tumbles down like a sandcastle, basically. And the result is that many millions live in relative poverty, really, but they do not see it. This became very apparent very quickly in 2019. You remember the yellow vests, yeah. Now, I don't know how it was reported everywhere because I don't watch television, but this was really what they call the deep France, the people from, certainly not the elite, it was the ordinary citizen really making a modest living. Those people who have to be careful, to get the wages, get to the end of the month, as it were. But Macron did not know those people. He never attempted to understand them. He was the son of professionals. He was young. He came from, I don't remember the city, but he came to study in Paris, and so then off he went, into this escalatory ladder, and never really bothered to know these workers. But the yellow vests, if you remember, that the repression was actually quite brutal. I think they say that about 38 people, the police were really, really violent in some cases. And I think it's about 38 people lost an eye or something like that. Some of them were really hurt, their arms and so on. In other words, the police reaction was really, really violent. Anyway, it all came to an end because of the pandemic thing, and so they all went home and stayed there. But of course, it erupted again. Now, why do I make a point about him not knowing these people? You may say, well, it's not his fault. He's, he's of this class. But there is something about this elitist attitude to life, especially if you are a politician, especially if you're the president of your country or the prime minister. I go back to Trump here a little bit because a lot of people have said, well, he's fake or something because he is a billionaire. How can he possibly know the interest or the language of normal working people? I remember an interview with his son, who actually said that Trump, this was in 2016 for that campaign, okay? Because this is when people are asking this question. So he pretends to be for the workers, but how can he, since he's a billionaire? And his son said, actually, he's very much at home with ordinary people because he was in the construction business. And I remember, he said, as a child, how he loved going to construction sites. And he said, I remember when I was 10, I had to sit there sort of waiting and waiting. And then he would say, oh, let's go and talk to the electricians, something like that. He said, but he felt comfortable. He knew how they spoke. He even knew the workers. This is his son. Okay. We don't have to believe it, but it is an explanation. He was much more comfortable talking to ordinary people than with the other billionaires who never accepted him anyway. Um, so he always was vis-a-vis the other billionaires as an outsider. They never accepted him. So he kind of felt more comfortable with ordinary people, and that is why perhaps he can communicate with them better. But this is not the case of Macron or with other elitists, politicians. In the old days, politicians actually felt, even if they were, very upper class, they felt that even the poor were part of the nation. In other words, they would at least have the intelligence, I would say, to realize that not everyone was in their same position. Um, they don't seem to make that effort now. They don't seem to remember the deplorables of Hillary Clinton. It's the same with Macron. They don't even attempt to understand them. Their attitude is, how can these people, a fisherman and a miner and a housewife who don't even speak grammatically, possibly try to bring me down? I'm kind of a genius. If not a genius, I'm very good. I mean, look at all the people that, around me, and the people who I deal with, and the people who selected me, and so on. How can I possibly let a housewife there shout at me or tell me whatever? They do not connect. They do not connect. They do not even attempt to. So I am not saying that you have to become one of them. Actually, I find that quite insulting. If you have been privileged in your background, okay, I'm not saying that you have to become a worker or that you have to pretend that you're one. Like so many of them go and pretend I'm like you, and you know that it is fake. It's almost insulting. No one is asking you, billionaire or elitist there, to become one of us. But the intelligence to understand that there are people in different circumstances, at least that, they don't seem to be able to understand that. Think of Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's a multimillionaire, billionaire, whatever. He has probably never met these people. They must find it particularly difficult to understand that there are people in these circumstances. But it is, uh, again, I'm not saying that you have to change your identity, but at least have the empathy to know there are people in very different circumstances to your own. So why don't you, if you want to be prime minister, if you want to be president, why don't you make the effort to go and meet them and hear them? Not with the cameras, not a pretend campaign thing. Just try to learn, the society of the social fabric of your country, and many different peoples and many different regions, what makes them tick. Understand that, so that when you become president or prime minister, you have a good idea of the pulse of the country. You know what I mean? And the point is that I think that if you're very young, like Sunak really, or like these other two young politicians in France, you haven't had time to metabolize, to digest that knowledge. But they should try to do that. You won't hurt them. You won't hurt them in the least to know how the other half lives. Um, I remember when at one time, I think it was his son, Robert Kennedy Jr., told the story of his father, Senator Robert Kennedy, when he was, obviously before he was assassinated, when he was campaigning. And one day, for the presidency, and one day he came home and he had 11 children or something like that, right? And they were all sitting at the dinner table in this big room. And he said, and my dad sat down and wouldn't speak for a little while. And he was just eating without speaking. And then he just stopped and looked at the rest of us. And he said, I've just been campaigning in a place where people live, um, where so many families live. So many families live in a place sort of half our dining room. And it really shook him. One thing is to kind of know, yes, there are poor people out there. The other one is to actually see it and experience the fact that in this tiny little house, perhaps, there are the area where he went, 20 people living there, smaller than his dining room. It shook him. I think that's fantastic for a politician to learn. You don't have to become poor yourself. You don't have to live in a hut. And you don't have to go around pretending, oh, I am one of you. No, just do it quietly and let it inform you. You will be such a much better of a politician. So anyway, just this empathy that we ask for, that we are not getting in our elitist politicians, leaders at the moment. So MACRON was basically invented. It was produced as a product. And I don't know when it was. I think it was in the 1940s or perhaps something like that. A man called Edward Barnes, Barnays, wrote a book entitled Propaganda. He was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. There have been some studies that said that Sigmund Freud was actually, he had cooked the statistics about hysteria and other experiments that he had done. I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but in any case, his nephew wrote a book about how to manipulate public opinion. Not only it was used, but not only on advertising products, but also creating politicians. Just manipulate public opinion, period. And how to manipulate the masses. So buy this and buy that and elect this and elect that one. He didn't invent it, obviously, the advertising, but he did synthesize it or systematize it or propagated it in any case. Okay, so Macron, what is going to happen now? What is he going to do? Because obviously, a different party will be the majority. They don't have an absolute majority, but together with the other right parties, he certainly have a different prime minister now. What is he going to do? I think a lot of people say, and I agree, that he was okay for the first 2 years, perhaps, but then he got bored. yeah, I think he's not okay with being, the details of government and governing and so on. I think he's much more comfortable with being, the president and going here, going there, that kind of thing, um, and rather um, ego, sort of a huge ego that he has, and hence, well, actually, I think one of the first ones to realize that he was all about grandiosity and a little bit of more smoke than fire. I think one of the first ones was Putin, President Putin of Russia. He, at the very before the war started, he went there, Macron, to advise Putin not to invade Ukraine and so on. There was this huge, the Kremlin, these beautiful, huge rooms that they have, and Putin was there by sort of near the flag and so on, and he was waiting for Macron, and Macron had to walk towards Putin for about quite a bit, a long corridor, like I don't know, 100 meters or something like that. And I when I saw him, he was enjoying this, you know, feeling like, I don't know, General de Gaulle or someone. And when he got there, they didn't shake hands, probably because of the pandemic. I think it was about that time. It wasn't quite over or something like that. But you remember the big table. Then, the, then Putin said, "Okay, we'll sit down." You remember that huge table where he was at one end? It was practically 10 meters. I mean, all the way there, and Putin was all the way here. That was a little bit of a humiliation. At least I think most people saw it that way. And I think it was a way to put him down a little bit. And then in the press conference, Putin said, "Oh, he's been making me go insane for 4 hours about Ukraine or something." So he made a comment like that. I don't quite remember the wording. But it was, you could hear between the lines, it was like, why is this man from France who doesn't even know his own people come and tell me and tell Russia to do this and not to do that? There was this certain put down attitude a little bit, and I don't think it was to put France down. I think he saw his personality, actually. Putin did, very quickly. I think it was one of the first ones. So, okay, so the Le Pen party, Marine Le Pen, um, that's another fascinating story, because her father used to be the very ultra right in France during the 50s and 60s. Um, they were practically new Nazis, I think. It was a very small party, but they were always fighting in the 50s and 60s with the communists. They would actually engage into fights and everything. He actually lost his eye. One of his eyes he has a glass eye. He lost it in one of these fights, physical fights with the communists. From the very beginning, he's still alive. I believe he's in his late 90s or something like that. Anyway, he continued like that with this ultra right wing party, And eventually, they never got more than two candidates. I believe it was a tiny little party. Eventually, his daughter said to him, "Look, I'm going to retire you. Okay, there is nothing else that you can do," and so on. She continued on for a long time, pretty much, on the same vein, not as much. And then she tried to bring it more, each time a little bit more to the center to appeal to obviously more people. At one time, she was very much against the EU and the Euro and bringing France out of the European Union and so on and so forth. And she diluted that too. So now I think she's more or less okay with it, kind of something like that. It doesn't mean that she won't change again, but at the moment that is her stand, sort of a little bit much more moderate. Um, Obviously, one could say for political reasons, but that's it. That is her stand at the moment. But the thing is that through her father, actually, um, he was very much in their stand. They were initially very much, well, you could say racist, very, very much anti-immigration, but it was the immigration of the 50s and 60s, and it was much more. It was more ugly. It was racist, really. And the other thing, he had two main points. One was that he was racist, and the other one was that denied. He didn't actually deny it outright. What had happened to the Jews during the Nazi period. He didn't say that it hadn't happened, but he was querying the numbers of the gas chambers or something like that. Okay. He didn't believe the whole story was like that. Now that was illegal. He actually, for saying things like that, he actually went to prison, had fines, and he was not allowed to run for office himself. Okay, so those were the two main things: the against him and his party, the racism, and the fact that he said that there were not as many or something like that. In any case, we cannot know it because you cannot research this. But okay, so his daughter sort of brought everything each time more and more to the center, kind of thing. But one thing that has remained is that whatever their faults are, they are not elitist. That is what separates them, basically. Not right or left, but up and down. This party actually has attracted a lot of the old left and a lot of the old communists. You know how, because it is the sovereignty bit. The working class is normally not globalist. It is nationalists. Yes, it is more the elites, the Atlanticists, the globalists that are, people with more means, as it were. Okay, so she has retained this attraction for a lot of the working class, actually. So this is why, because even though it is a right-wing party, it has working class people there. They have never. Um, it is she was brought up in this sort of working class community. She did study and so on, but their roots are with ordinary people. Neither she nor her father actually have any fear of walking into a bar and talking to workers there and eat a baguette with cheese and whatever it is, just with ordinary people in a tavern or bar. That is something that Macron would never do, cannot possibly do, cannot see himself doing that. Did you see the difference here? So, okay, what else do I have to say about this? So, the reason why I say that she might change again if she gains power, if now Macron decides to resign or to, I don't know whether, because he still has 3 years left. And I don't know whether he'll be able to put up with the daily fight of having, you know, the assembly being from different parties. They're going to fight him all the way. So I don't know, but he, what happened, what I'm saying is that it is possible if she feels powerful enough to start again sort of being more critical of the European Union. Because the European Union at the moment, with the elections and with what happened, they have not listened. I mean, do you see from Estonia, Kaja Kallas becoming the equivalent of the foreign minister of the EU? I mean, she has. I have a video talking about her, but prohibiting when the Soviet Union fell, as like in Ukraine, a lot of Russian people were living in those Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, and so overnight they became the citizens of another country. But of course, they spoke Russian. They were Russians. Well, the same as with Ukraine. She has now prohibited the Russian language. This all those things. Um, Talking about Putin, who has to be fought, these horrible people, the Russians and so on. But the thing that she doesn't say is, first of all, that her husband does very good business in Russia. But the second thing is that her father was one of the prominent people in the Soviet government for that region of Estonia, and he was the very high-ranking member in the banking community. She actually grew up as one of the few people who could actually have such a great life under the Soviet communist system. But now, all those awful people, it's quite amazing. This is where I think the EU is going from bad to worse, but that's another story. So I will leave it here. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.